Do you share that sentiment that this is classic Russian propaganda? Good morning.
Absolutely, absolutely. We know who we're dealing with. And Russians have proved so many times that I have absolutely no doubt. And it was expected. It was expected because the timing is very indicative in this regard. When the peace talks between Ukrainian and American delegations have produced a peace plan, which is far from being perfect, but despite all this, it was supposed to be presented to Putin. Putin immediately in desperation started to look for an excuse, a pretext to disrupt negotiations and to reject this peace plan. So it's absolutely clear, even from logical point of view, you can see discrepancies because on the one hand, Russians claim that there were more than 90 Ukrainian drones, and they don't report any damage done because of this. So for them, it's typical. But, when they're lying, they cannot do properly.
Noting that Ukraine deny it, Donald Trump has said that he was very angry to learn about it. Would it be acceptable, in your view, to target Vladimir Putin's residence?
Well, first of all, I would like to remind that there was a resolution adopted by the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, according to which Putin was recognized as a terrorist and his regime as a terrorist regime. At the same time, he is an indicted war criminal. As an indicted war criminal, he has certain rights if he becomes prisoner of war, and I hope he will sooner or later. But as a terrorist, it's an interesting legal question. Can he be regarded as a legitimate military target?
And what's your view?
I'm professor of international law, and it's an interesting question to which there is no clear-cut answer.
Okay.
But, the thing is that the comic situation is because Putin is trying to play victim. The terrorist, number one in the world, is trying to cause pity from President Trump, and it looks ridiculous to me.
What are your thoughts, your reflections on this meeting that took place in Mar-a-Lago between President Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky, which both men, and as is often the case, praising the talk, saying they had gone well. Is that a reality? Do we need to get our skates on? Or given that Donald Trump called Vladimir Putin just before the meeting, should we actually be worried?
Well, it's kind of relative, and the spirit and the mood of this meeting between American and Ukrainian president was good. Let's recall what happened just in the beginning of this year. So we see definitely certain progress made. But at the same time, there are some sticking points which haven't been solved yet. I mean, first of all, so-called territorial issue, because for Ukraine it's unacceptable. We cannot just withdraw our troops from our territory, and security guarantees. But luckily, before Ukrainian diplomacy and our president, it's quite a challenge. How to keep President Trump on the side of Ukraine and not let him to be on the side of Putin. It's very difficult. And I believe that our president and our diplomacy is doing miracles.
Thank you very much for your time. Oleksandr Merezhko is chair of the Ukrainian Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee. To Ben Hodges, who was previously the Commanding General of the United States Army in Europe, thank you for your time, Mr. Hodges. If I could ask you firstly on that point with which I finished with Oleksandr Merezhko, the talks, what was your response to the rhetoric coming out of Mar-a-Lago? Good morning.
Good morning, Henry. Well, first of all, I think it's clearer now than ever before that President Trump is unfortunately taking the side of the Kremlin. I mean, the fact that he has a 2-hour phone call with Putin before he meets Zelensky, Putin uses that as an opportunity to reinforce the talking points he wants, particularly the one of the inevitability of Russian victory. I mean, that's critical when Trump says, you're going to have to give up territory. It's better to do it in a deal rather than losing it later, as if it's inevitable. And I think that the president, the way he equated Russian attacks on Ukrainian civilian targets with the Ukrainian attacks on Russian oil and gas infrastructure, said, basically it's the same thing. So he's empathetic. And then the most galling was when he said he sympathized with Putin on the how inconvenient it would be to stop for a ceasefire and then have to start again, how difficult that would be. I mean, this was is embarrassing and maybe his worst performance in a long list.
And he also said that President Putin wants what's best for Ukraine, which I think would be news to people in Kyiv. Can I ask you as well, the rhetoric that came out, though, was positive. Is that why we have this baseless claim from the Kremlin about attacking President Putin's home, would you argue?
You know, one of the people I follow very closely is Phillips O'Brien, who writes every day very good analysis of this, and he used the metaphor of the pantomime of what's going on, and that and unfortunately European leaders are falling for it. They keep talking, looking for any morsel of positiveness, which is exactly what the Kremlin needs and what Trump needs, so that no European countries actually take decisive action, because they don't want to be seen as the one that derailed what looks like it was going well. And so when Trump talks about, well, we had a great phone call, we're at 95%, it's almost all sorted. None of the meaningful things have been sorted. I mean, the one that the professor just mentioned, the land. I talked to Ukrainians, they say there is no way. It's strategically impossible for them to willingly give up land that the Russians have not even taken yet because of that particular geography. And so they're going to continue fighting with or without help from the United States, UK, or anybody else, just like I think most people would in such a situation.
And of course, the security guarantees are also tricky. But if we do focus on the land, which you mentioned, the Donbas region, of course, large parts of that, like Luhansk, are controlled by Russia, a huge percentage of that. What do you think happens to that territory?
Well, first of all, I think the Ukrainians have to sort of be seen as participating in these talks. And President Zelensky, I think, is wise to say, okay, we're prepared to do it. But there has to be a security guarantee with Western troops, whether it's U.S., British, German, Polish, whoever, in this so-called demilitarized zone, because the Ukrainians know that the Russians have never, ever lived up to any agreement that they were not forced to, with which they were not forced to comply. So a security guarantee is only going to be if there are credible forces on the ground with rules of engagement that allow them to immediately strike back and inflict consequences on the Russians who would have violated any sort of ceasefire. So I think this is President Zelensky probably calling the bluff of the American president, because he doesn't trust President Trump. And I think I would encourage all European leaders to be very wary about believing in any Trump administration guarantee for Ukraine.
Lastly, we are approaching 4 years since the start of this invasion and the subsequent war which has followed. Donald Trump promised to end this on day one. Do you think 2026 will be the year that we finally see some sort of agreement, some sort of ceasefire?
I think it's possible, but it won't be because of the Trump administration's negotiating approach. Their approach, and by the way, it's worth remembering, this war started in 2014, so more than 11 years ago. That's an important thing to remember, because that's when the Russians took Crimea and part of the Donbas way back then. So the possibility of the war ending in 2026 is more likely due to, I think, Russia's economy finally collapsing because of the persistent attacks by Ukraine on Russia's oil and gas infrastructure. And as I see, more and more European countries are finally taking action to stop the flow of Russian oil using these shadow fleet vessels. That's what will eventually bring down Russia.
And just, sorry, one other question. With the rules of engagement, would it have been acceptable? I note that they completely deny it, but I'm just curious for your view on whether you would go for President Putin's mansion or home.
I'd like to capture it and then turn it over to the poor people of the surrounding oblasts and let them take what they like. The big headline for me in that was that President Trump immediately took Putin's claim, even though he has the biggest intelligence apparatus on the planet. He immediately took Putin's claim.